Okay, I think I have everything back up and running. We had a small issue in the previous thing. I needed to restart my computer, but luckily I was able to do the video conversion. Didn't lose the whole lecture. All right, so let's get back into our Unity project. Let's see where we left off. Let me get Keynote open here. I guess this is Wednesday's class, right? The 13th, March 13th. Again, I'll remind you that we are back in class with live lectures on Friday, the 15th. My plan is to be on campus, but do keep an eye on your uh, email in case we do class online, which sometimes happens on Fridays, depending on what I have to do related to Ann Arbor, but I have not gotten any of those notices yet. I'll find because today is Sunday, the 10th, that I'm making this recording. Um, uh, so I'm guessing on Monday, when the university's open again, I'll start getting some emails and stuff. All right, so let's see where we left off here. So I'm in my game. Let's just hit play here. All right, we got some compile errors. Let's see what it's complaining about. All right. Sometimes I leave myself some errors that I need to fix on purpose. Let's see if that was the case here. Been a little bit since I last looked at this. Okay, so let's just kind of catch ourselves back up here and see what the deal is. Um, I definitely took the current room out of our singleton and we probably put it somewhere else. So let's see what the scoop is with that. Remember, we have our dungeon controller game object, which has attached to it our dungeon controller script. And let's look at what that dude does here quickly. I'm gonna get to it from our assets folder. All right, here's our dungeon controller script. All right, so when a scene first launches, we ask the singleton, we ask the singleton to get us the current player and get the current room the current player's in, rather than the singleton keeping track of that room. So more than likely, this is going to be the fix to a lot of those four errors that we had. It must have been one of the last changes that we had. All right, so when a scene first launches, we get the current room from the singleton by way of our player, and then we make sure we turn the appropriate exits on or off based on um, our the room we're supposed to be in, because remember, we now have this back end. So we have controllers, so our dungeon controller and our player controller. These are things that live on the Unity side, and these guys are mono behaviors, so they are attached to game objects. Where behind the scenes, we have our, let me go ahead and get our My Singleton launched here. We have our normal classes. So we have our My Singleton that holds on to a bunch of different pieces of information. One of them is this generate dungeon thing. I'm going to go ahead and minimize that so it's not taking up, well, although that was the last thing in there, but I'll just minimize that so it's not taking up a whole bunch of space. So right now our singleton starts off with a current direction. We don't know where we're heading. And then we know about the player and we know about the dungeon that gets set up to be the generated dungeon. And let me just quickly peek here at the end of that. We do, inside of generate dungeon, we create our instance of our player and we add the player to our dungeon, which puts the player into the dungeon start room. We'll go and look at that here. Here's our dungeon. So when we add a player comes in as a parameter. We let the dungeon know about the player that's currently in this dungeon. And then we also add that player to the current start room of the dungeon. Okay, so that's what happens there. And that's it for dungeon controller. Now let's go look at our player controller. Yes, I kind of remember an error we had near the end of class last time. That had to do with I had renamed player to player controller, since our controllers are our mono behaviors, where player is related to our code behind an individual player. A player has a name, a player knows about their current room, and then we can, which is a private variable, and then we have a getter for that current room. So right now, a player has a name that we actually currently can't get from outside of player. And then they also have a current room, which we can get from outside of player. This is a code behind thing. Notice it's not a mono behavior. So this is something we're using to keep track of players. Our player controller, on the other hand, this guy would be attached to Chomp. Just as a reminder here, we go in here and click on Chomp. And this guy has our player controller script associated with it. So let me jump back over here. And inside of our player controller, we have our usual stuff where, that we had for a long time now, where we're turning exits on and off, so we can kind of get the room set up correctly. Inside of start, we initially turn off all the exits. We turn off the middle of the room because the middle of the room we use to get our guy to kind of stop when he gets there. We ask our singleton about our current direction to find out, is this the original room we were in, or did we just enter this room from somewhere else, so we can get him facing the correct direction, all that jazz. All right. Then we have some, trigger entering stuff that deals with, what did we collide with? Did we hit a door? Did we hit the middle of the room? And we were not in the very first room when we started at the middle. And then I have this crazy stuff that I put down here. So something in our else must be dealing with another trigger that we haven't done anything with yet. So I'll just leave that until it reveals itself to us what our mindset was there. On update, we are talking about the current, what arrow keys we've pressed, up arrow, down arrow, so on and so forth. All right, and these are where our errors currently are, where we're no longer directly holding on to our current room through our singleton. Instead, we get our room by way of our player get current room. So let me go back to that. So this is my singleton dot the player dot get current room. All right. And room does not have an is open door. Let's go look at room here. I think we're starting to see where we left off. So room has an exit. We return a true or false whether or not it has an exit in a certain direction. So let's go back into player controller. All right, so from a player's perspective, the player controller is attached to a player. If we press the up arrow and we're currently not moving, and there is a door to the north. All right, so is open door, it looks like we have renamed or probably implemented a little differently to has exit in a direction. So we will update this to has exit. All right, so now the way we get the current room is by asking our singleton to give us the current player, ask the player what his current room is, and then find out if that room has a particular exit. So we can go ahead and just copy that stuff and replace these lines with that. All right, so I think that should get those errors to go away now in our game. So now let's see the state of our game. I think that's where we would have normally ended up last class, um, with the issue being that we did not, we had that error at the very end of class. All right, so I should be in the starting room of our game. Oh, hold on, we got a object reference not set to an instance. Okay, so we have a error here. So if we hit the up key, which was what I was just hitting, and we're not moving, that guy should already be set. So it's the my singleton, the player. Does he already have a our singleton is firstborn. We call our generate dungeon. Generate dungeon goes and does its stuff. Then we set the player. Ah, here's the issue. So oh no, it's not. So my singleton dot the player, which is my variable up here, he's equal to a new player. We then add that player to our dungeon, and then we return the dungeon. That's what gets returned right here. So who is it complaining is that null pointer. So when you get an error like this where it says null reference exception, object reference not set to an instance of an object, it looks like these were all runtime errors because they didn't pop up until I hit the up arrow. So I'm guessing if I go back here and I try to hit the up arrow again, or is the game already stopped? Probably, yeah, see, notice I'm creating more of those errors. Yeah, so it's complaining about something in there that one of those objects on that line, so something on this line is currently equal to null. My feeling is it must be this player. I do not know why it would be that. Let's go into room here. And for has exit, I'm just going to quickly put something in here. Let's see, what is it? Debug dot log in has exit. All right, so inside of our player, or rather, I'm sorry, inside of room where we're asking a room if it has an exit, I'm just putting a little debug line in here that says in has exit. Now, this is the equivalent to us telling a mono behavior to print. But since this guy is not a mono behavior, he's just a normal thing, we have to, the way we can get it out to our console is by saying debug.log. I'm not showing you the debugger yet. There's a good reason for that, but let's just leave it at that for now. All right, so I want to find out if we're getting into this has exit. That'll give me a kind of a quick and dirty way of finding out where this null pointer thing is. I'm thinking we are not getting into this exit right now, and then we'll know where we can go and look here in a second. So let me go back out here. I'm going to go ahead and stop our game. Now we'll run it again. And I'm going to go ahead and hit up. All right, we get our error here. But we're not getting into that script. So that means it has to be with our player would be my guess. But the player does have a current room. Let's follow the yellow brick road here. So when we first instantiate our player here, this guy is a real thing. So player is not null. Then we add the player to our dungeon. So let's go and follow that. So here is our dungeon. Here's add player. For add player, we let the dungeon know about the player. Then we add the player to the start room right here, which is a room. And so we're going to go into room and look at add player. Where's room? There we go. Room, add player. So here's the problem. So a room becomes aware of a player. This room knows about the player that's been added to it, but player never gets to find out about the room he's currently in. So we need to teach a player how to have their current room set. So this is where we left off. So we're going to say public void set current room. And this guy will take in a room R as a parameter, and we'll say this dot current room is equal to R. All right, so now we've taught players how to set their current room. And then what we want to do here, so really we're letting two different things know about the current room. When a player is added to the room, okay, so this is a room, this is from the room class. When we add a player to a room, we let the room know about the player. But we also then need to let the current player know about the room. So how do we let the current player know that they are currently in this particular instance of room? We pass this in there. All right. So as we are adding a player to a room, the room becomes aware of the player. The player also needs to know about the room they're currently in. This is where our null pointer exception was coming from. We were never actually telling the player about the room that they were in. So this variable right here was null. And we were trying to ask questions about it. If you go back to our player controller, we were asking the player about their current room, and the player was not in a current room. So this was boiling down to a value of null. Now it'll be an actual thing. So I'll save everything. Do I have everything saved? Yep. We'll go ahead and start this again. So I expect that our original dungeon is going to look a little bit better now. Although that's an interesting start state. What was our start room for our dungeon? Well, that looked correct. I think our exits are backwards. So right now it's showing open doors where there's actually closed doors. Okay. So I think this is kind of where we left off. Now we need to now the player knows about the room they're in. The dungeon knows about the player, the room knows about the player. Now we need to make, as our player moves through our dungeon, we need to make the doors look correct to have the shape of our actual dungeon. So it matches up to this type of thing. Remember, we made our start room this guy. So when we're first in this very first room, we should only see an exit to the north. The west, east, and south should all be turned off in that room. This is the difference between our front end and our back end. So when we first start our game, I'm just going to start it over here. We want this, the visual representation of our room, to match up to the behind the scenes data of our dungeon. So the current room the player is currently in should have a closed door, a closed door, a closed door, but this should be open because the room we are currently sitting in is this room right here that only has an exit to the north. All right, so that's the piece of code we need to write next, is to get this this written in that way. Because right now, as I'm in here, even though I visually see the wrong room, if I try to go left, it's not letting me. If I try to go right, it's not letting me. If I try to go down, it's not letting me. But if I try to go up, it's letting me. All right. But the issue here is that because I haven't turned on and off the right exits and the colliders and yada, 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 we're not actually transitioning between rooms. All right. So I'm basically reloading the same room over and over and over again. When what we want to do is, as a player leaves to the north, as soon as we get this looking correct, we want the player to leave the room they're currently in and get passed into the next room, the room they're supposed to go into, which would be this room right here. So as the player leaves the first room, they are going to get removed from this room, added to this room, and then we want when our scene reloads, we want it to show the current state of that room, which should have an exit to the south as well as an exit to the north, leading to the correct places. Okay, so let's go and make that happen now. So we can start with our first room. So when the scene first starts and we have our player, we need to ask our player who knows about their current room, what should this room look like? And turn the right exits on and off and that kind of stuff. So let's get that piece working first. All right. So I'll go ahead and stop this. We now know that the first room knows about the player. The player knows about the room because we're able to respond to our directions. But before we even do that, we need to get our room looking correct. Let's get into our code here. So let's see, who do we want to handle the exits? All right, so on our dungeon controller, this guy knows about our doors. All right. And he's getting the current room. So this is the code that's supposed to handle that. So the current room is our singleton asking for the player, asking what room is the current player in. If the current room, which is this variable, has an exit to the north, we want to start updating our closed doors to setting them active or not active. Okay, so let's make sure we still have those hooked up because there were some times where we disconnected things and stuff like that. So remember, our dungeon controller thing here has a public variable. Remember that's MVC in action for Unity, where we have exposed this array of game objects to our closed doors. Now, we could make the argument, should this be an array, or is that, because now we have to remember, is this a, bucket 0 is which direction, bucket 1 is what direction, bucket 2 is what direction, bucket 3 is what direction. But we'll burn that bridge when we get to it. So you can decide if you like the way we were doing it here, or if it's a bad solution. But either way, it'll be instructive because it'll kind of show us why this is a little bit tough to keep track of. So let's go and look at our dungeon controller inside of Unity. So we can find that guy by clicking on our dungeon controller game object. And here is our dungeon controller. And here is that array. All right. So the first element is our north closed door. Second element is south. Third is east. Fourth is west. So the reason I mentioned that this might not be the best implementation of the world is because now the only way we know that bucket 0 of that array is the north exit is because we just saw it out in Unity. Inside here, if I am talking about closed doors bucket 0, I really have no way of knowing right here. This isn't explaining to me that that is in fact the north exit. All right. So we might say that that is a fairly crappy implementation. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and update this to be more explanatory, since all of our rooms have exactly 4 things. So we're going to just create game objects for north exit. And these are actually the closed doors, right? Because we wanted to visually have the things turn on or off. All right, so our dungeon controller is about the visuals of it. And then our player controls the colliders that are over there. So let's call it north door, south door, east door, west door. Okay. So we'll go ahead and set those guys. Go back into Unity here. Oh, because I still have some errors in here, it's not updating the script. So I want to change this to north door. I want to change this to south door, east door, and west door. All right, so now that that guy is it doesn't have compile errors anymore, it will update inside of Unity. So notice here that now when I click on our dungeon controller game object and I go over to our script, it's no longer that array. Now it's 4 separate variables, one for the north, south, east, and west door. All right. Now these guys are all inactive by default. Okay, so I have all these doors turned off. But let's go and hook them up. So we're going to have our north door there. Our, what does that say? East door here. Our west door there. And our south door here. Let me just make sure those actually align to the real doors. So there's west, it's on the west, east is on the east, north is on the north, south is on the south. Okay, so those doors are in the right place. All right. Now we'll go back into our code. And now when this script spins up, we're going to get the current room by asking our singletons player for their current room. So the very first time this loads, the current room the player is in is this room right here, which should only have an exit to the north. All right, if everything else is built correctly. All right, so now we go through and we ask the question, does the current room have an exit to the north? The answer is yes. We're going to set the north exit active to true. All right. Now, right now, those are closed doors, though. So let's think about how this should actually work. I'm going to go ahead and turn that north door on. Okay. So what we're going to do here is we're actually going to close all the doors by default. All right. So the default state of a room is to have all the doors closed, and then we'll turn off the closed doors because that's what we're dealing with here. These aren't exits being enabled or disabled. These are actually closed doors, blockades, if you will. So now we're going to ask this question slightly different. If we should have an exit to the north, we're going to remove that closed door to the north. If we should have an exit to the south, we're going to remove that closed door from the south. We're just turning it off. We should have an exit to the east, we'll remove that exit to the east. If we should have an exit to the west, we'll remove that exit to the west. All right, so let's stop this. Let's go and run our game again. And our hope is that now this guy looks correct for our very first room looking like this. Go ahead and hit play. And there is our first room, where the west, east, and south doors are still closed, but our north door is open. All right, so when we go to the north, we did leave this room visually. So this is kind of where we can start connecting our sandwich here. All right, remember we have our front end of our application, which is what we're looking at right this second. All right, the visual user interface. We have the back end data, which is our dungeon and our player and our collection of rooms. That's the back end. Well, so right now on my front end, my first room looks correct. When I hit up and have my player start going north, he hits that the trigger up there by that door, which reloads our script, and then shows us the current room the player's in. Well, from a data perspective, the current room the player's in has not actually changed, right? We didn't remove the player from that first room. We didn't go in and say, okay, well, you just went through this door right here, so you are no longer in this room. We've removed you from here and we've added you to here. That has not happened. So what we need to do is, as a player goes through an exit, before we load this next scene, we need to make sure we update the back end code to make sure the player ends up in the correct room so that when the scene loads, it shows the correct exits for the next room. All right. We need to make right now, our front end does show whatever our back end says. That's what this code inside of our dungeon controller does. This stuff right here says, what room is the player currently in? I'm going to make this room have the correct doors. What's not changing right now, though, no matter how many times we move between rooms, the player's current room is not actually changing. All right, so we need to go and put that code in where the player is leaving a room. And before we actually load the next scene, we need to update that player. I'm just updating. I gotta charge different things here. My laptop's getting a little low. All right. By the way, it's been fairly entertaining when I'm sometimes sitting in the lounge here on the cruise ship. I sit there with my laptop, but I have my headset on. So obviously completely antisocial, but I can still see people and things like that. And so it becomes an interesting talking point. So it's, right now I'm in my room. So I don't have distractions and I'm not just sitting there talking to the air. But it's always interesting to have new technology um, you know, in public, and you have people come up and start conversations about it and that kind of stuff. All right. Okay. So right now, what's not changing is our player's current room is never updated. So we need to go into our player controller right here. All right. So right here, if the player collided with something, I'm going to go ahead and remove this print statement that was from a previous debugging type thing. And just so I don't forget, I'm also going to get rid of that line we put in a little bit ago when we were finding out what our null value was. And that was actually, I mean, obviously I was catching myself up to where we had left off, but that process we went through earlier where we were debugging it, really pay good attention to that. At some point, I'm going to show you how to use a debugger, which allows you to kind of set breakpoints in your program so you don't have to put these print statements all over the place. But I do want you to kind of look at how I've been debugging this by just putting a couple of print statements here and there to try to narrow down where our actual problem is. That's an approach to take for a little bit until your program gets so large that throwing random print statements in different places becomes a little bit unwieldy. So what we do instead, the way debuggers work, which we do have access to here, we just actually have to connect. If you notice up here, we can say for debug, we can attach to Unity. That way we can, well, here, let me just show you real quick. So for asking your room whether it has an exit, what I'm going to do here is this our breakpoint thing? No, it's not. I'm going to right click. Do I know how to do this on here? I want to insert a breakpoint. Well, let me attach it. Well, it's already attached to Unity. How do you put a breakpoint in Visual Studio? Most IDEs, you just right click or something over here to have to just go farther. Oh, there we go. I just had to go farther out to the left. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to say, you know what, I'm interested in has exit being, getting into this function. I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to put this breakpoint. I'm just going to click over here next to line 27. So basically, rather than putting a print statement in here and stuff, I'm saying I'm interested in when I hit this line. Okay. Now, right now I have Visual Studio set in debug mode instead of release mode. And I have it attached to Unity. You can also choose to attach to Unity and play. Let's see if we're going to have to do that or if I play from Unity if this triggers. So all I did is put that breakpoint in there. Now I'm going to go back to Unity and I'm going to turn this guy off. I'm going to go ahead and hit play. All right, so now we've gotten into this code here. Let's see if over in Visual Studio we're at this line. It looks like we are perhaps not from there. So let me actually start the thing from in Visual Studio. So I turned off the game there. I'm going to go into Visual Studio. I'm going to, oh, it would have worked. I think I have to hit this play button here. There we go. So by hitting that play button, I'm telling it to just go ahead and attach to Unity. All right. So now my code here is attached to Unity. Unity is now asking, hey, the C# debugger now attached. So I can say, do I want to enable debugging for this session? Do I want to enable debugging for all projects? Let's just turn on enable debugging for this session for right now. That way we're not setting some permanent flag somewhere. So I'll do that. Okay. So now all I've done is told Visual Studio to connect to this guy. It's finishing that linking. So now my Visual Studio is physically connected to Unity, not just to the directory where my code exists. Okay. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit play. Start up my project. And notice here now it kicked back over here. It is showing me that, oh, we are at line 27. And if I look in here, let's see, where is my variables? Can I click on direction here? Okay, yep. So it's showing me my list of breakpoints. Right now I'm at this breakpoint right here. If I click on locals, it's showing me these variables. It's showing me what the this variable is equal to. It's an instance of room. It's showing me what the current value of I is, which is 0 for how many exits. I'm sorry, not that. Current value of I is right here, 0 for this for loop. And it's showing me my variable called direction, which is what was passed into has exit. What's this linked? Where does this come from? This comes from our dungeon controller right here, where we're asking our current room, do you have an exit to the north? All right. So rather than me putting in um, uh, print statements to print some stuff out, I can just drop a breakpoint real quick and then get to a line and then explore the various variables that are in my scope here. So I have access to the room. This room has a current player. It has a number of exits, which is 1. The name of the room is R1, and it has a collection of exits. And in that collection of exits, notice we have a single exit. We have, because we only have an exit to the north. All the other ones are nothing. If I open up that exit, here's my destination room, which is a pointer to another room. And then I have the direction it goes to is the north. So notice here with the debugger, rather than printing out one variable here and there, you can just dig in and get all the current values of different stuff. So I can find out about the exit to the north is a destination room, which is a pointer to a room that currently does not have a player in it. So the player is currently null. That room has 2 exits, which is accurate, right? Because if I were to go to the north from this first room, I'm in this room right here, which has an exit to the north and an exit to the south. So there's 2 exits. All right. The name of that room is R2, which is this guy right here. And that room has these exits. So he's going to have an exit to the north. Well, this is the exit to the north, and he's going to have an exit to the south. So the north exit is going to go to a room called R3. So there's R3. So you can actually walk through these variables using the debuggers. The debuggers are very, very, very powerful when you really want to dig in and kind of search and stuff like that. But now for just kind of quick one-offs, just think, okay, well, do I even get to this line? A lot of times I'll just throw a quick print statement in there. Over time, you might decide, especially as projects get larger, whether or not that makes the most sense or not. But for us in this case, I think that having some print statements is fine, but we're maybe just starting to get on that edge of saying, hey, I'm interested in getting some more information, or at least having that information available to me as I'm trying to find out what's wrong with my program. So debuggers are pretty powerful, and maybe we'll start using them a little bit more now since I decided to introduce it at this point. Now, something you can do though is once you are in the debugging mode, so it's now at this breakpoint. Breakpoints mean basically pause the program right here. Well, once I'm here, I can now use these buttons up here. So I can either say, go ahead and just continue running the program until I hit this breakpoint again. Now, I'll go ahead and do that. And we know that the next time I'm going to hit that is in our dungeon controller when it gets to this if statement, when it asks the room if it has an exit to the south. All right, so we'll go ahead and see that. So I'll go ahead and hit play. So now we're in here again, and notice that it's interested in whether or not we have an exit to the south. Now I'm going to go ahead and show you how you can kind of walk through the program. So I can go ahead and say, I want to step over the next line versus step into a line. So for instance, if you have well, here, I'll show you. So I'm going to go ahead and step over this line, which will get me into the for loop. All right, well, it's actually got me to this next line, which is the opening curly brace. I'll step over that. So now I'm at this if statement. Now this if statement goes into an array, goes into a get direction. I can go ahead and say I want to step into that. And notice now it took me into the get direction function. All right, I'll go ahead and step over, which is going to return this dot direction. This dot direction is north. So on and so forth. I'll step over, so it took me back out here. Step over, since this was false, it was not a direction to the north, or to the south is what I was looking for. It had a direction to the north. So I'm able to kind of walk through the program line by line by line, seeing this stuff. All right, so a pretty powerful tool as a debugger. Takes some practice getting used to it. They pretty much all work the same. As you saw here at the beginning, I kind of fumbled through how do I set my breakpoint, but once I got in there, it's all debuggers have this idea of stepping over, stepping into, stepping out. So, you know, here, if I go ahead and hit play again, and now I get to my third call to has exit, which is this guy right here. He's interested, is there an exit to the east? All right. So I get to my third call of that dude. And I can see that's the one I'm in because the direction we're looking for right here is east. I'm going to go ahead and step over the for loop, step over the curly brace. I'm going to go ahead and step into this function. And then let's say I'm, you know, if this could be 500 lines long, this function. Let's say, okay, everything looks fine here. I'm going to go ahead and just step out of there and then step over and keep going. So you can just kind of walk through your program in the way that you want to walk through it, paying extra attention to certain things or skipping over things as you see fit. Similarly, you can add more breakpoints. So I went ahead and added another breakpoint here. I'm going to go ahead and hit play, which is going to run me to the breakpoint up here for our west has exit. So even though the program's still running, I went ahead and just put in another breakpoint real quick. So I'll go ahead and hit play. That gets us to our first breakpoint, which is looking for the west. Now, if I go ahead and hit play again, it's just going to continue on until it hits another breakpoint, which is the new one I just put in right here, which is kind of a useless breakpoint, but it shows me that I'm currently at this guy here, and you can see if any variables updated if you were in code that might do that. All right, so debuggers, super powerful, super powerful. But you know, these guys are the professional tools that are going to be a little intimidating at first, and so you start getting used to it. So I think we're starting to get to the point now where the code feels fairly, you know, is getting fairly complex. All right, so I went ahead and stopped our debugger there by just hitting the stop button up here in Visual Studio. That debugger only runs when we hit play up here. That's how we do it. We can attach it to Unity through that. All right, you could also tell it to attach to Unity and play if you wanted to. Notice now there's a third option because my Unity game is still playing, so I can attach to the thing that's currently running as well. All right, so I'll go back out here to Unity. I'll go ahead and stop my game. All right, so now what we really want to have happen, check something here real quick. Whoop. All right, so our current state of things is that I can start in this room right here, and it shows me the right exits. I can go to the north, but what it does is it shows me this room again, because our player is never actually getting removed from R1 and put into R2. So what we're going to do for homework, and this will be due Friday. Go back to our previous assignment. Just so I have my sample code here. So given our sample code, and I'll update here, I'll actually just do it right now so I don't forget. Open up GitHub desktop. We'll go ahead and said code up to player being removed from a room as he leaves. I'll commit that to main. I'll push it to origin. All right, so now you have that updated code up in the cloud. So given this sample code, update your program to allow a player to leave the room they are currently in and update their current room such that when the next dungeon, well, let's say, just say the next scene loads, it shows the